In the evolutionary naturalistic world, chance becomes something that determines what happens in the absence of any other cause or design. Every effect is determined by some cause. Even the simple flip of a coin cannot occur without a cause. It's determined by something, a number of factors, from the precise amount of force that I flip it with, to the distance it has to fall before hitting the ground, all determine whether that coin is going to land on heads or on tails. It is those forces, not chance, that determine whether it's going to land on heads or tails. What may appear to us as random or totally by chance is nonetheless determined by something. That is the law of cause and effect. For every effect, there has to be a cause. That's natural science, not a rule that scientists made up. So dealing with the Big Bang, we have to come to a point in our lives and ask ourselves, what caused all of this matter that supposedly started the Big Bang? The naturalists would have us believe and say that all the matter was either eternal or just appeared out of chance or nothing. We all know that the latter is absolute nonsense. So if the matter is eternal, what caused the first event that originally set this evolutionary process in motion? No one and nothing made it happen. That too is irrational. Nihilism. Nihilism is a philosophy that says everything is entirely without meaning, without logic, without reason. Common sense logic suggests that every watch has a watchmaker, and every building has a builder, and every structure has an architect, and every arrangement has a plan, and every plan has a designer. And when we look out to the universe, we see a universe that is infinitely more complex than any watch or any building. So if we abandon logic, we're left with pure nonsense. And this is worse than any myth, because it obliterates all meaning and sense from everything. But it is, once again, pure religion of the most pagan variety, because it requires a spiritual leap of faith into an abyss of utter irrationality. It is the age-old religion of fools, but in modern scientific dress. So ask yourselves, if chance rules, we have to come to the conclusion that God cannot. And if God rules, there's no room for chance. And if chance causes or determines anything, God is not truly God. Chance is not a force. Chance cannot make anything happen. Chance is nothing. It simply does not exist. It cannot be the cause of any effect. It is contrary to every law of science, every principle of logic, and every intuition of sheer common sense. So the title of this presentation is Out of Nothing, Nothing Comes. Ex nihilo nihilo fit is the Latin term for that. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to actually talk about and define what science is. We have to have a basis of understanding of what operational science is compared to origins science. We have to have a clear understanding that operational science deals with things that can be observed and repeated. It deals with medicine. It's given us computers. It's enabled us to put a man on the moon. But how is that different from origins? Origins science, or evolutionary science, deals with pure assumption. It deals with things that cannot be repeated. It deals with the principles of causality. It deals with theories. And a theory is simply a scientific hypothesis that survives experimental testing. But if we can't observe it, then how can it be origin science? Another definition says a theory is an unproven assumption. So operational science, we all agree with, is real science. We can observe it, we can repeat it. But origins is purely science fiction. It deals with the past that cannot be repeated. So in this presentation, we're going to deal with two models. We're going to deal with the evidence of age. We're going to deal with what the origin of stars, scientific evidence of the Big Bang, and how the Bible and the Big Bang cosmology go together. And at the end, I'm going to put forth a new revolutionary theory that Dr. Russell Humphreys has come up with that can explain how we see distant starlight in a young universe. So to start off with, our two models. Our two models are very clear-cut. We have evolution, which includes theistic evolution, and that includes the Big Bang. It includes a universe that they say is between 12 and 15 billion years old. And it says that everything in the heavens was formed by natural processes, all on its own, by chance. And we've already said the chance is not real. And then we have the biblical model, which says that God spoke the universe into existence, that there was a young universe, and that God created the stars. So what do we know? We have to define first what the Big Bang is. And the Big Bang, science tells us, is 13 to 15 billion years old. And 15 billion years ago, a huge explosion occurred, creating this universe. And the universe began as an infinitely dense, hot fireball scrambling of space and time. Now, think about it. Have you seen an explosion? We'll say a firecracker, whether a small black cat or a large one. When it blows up, does it go into an accurate pattern, systematic? Or does it go everywhere, random, complete chaos? Chaos. But the Big Bang is supposed to have created order that we see today, that it had a purpose to it, which we know is irrational again. But we have to ask ourselves, where did this matter come from that created this huge fireball? So, we need to also look at how the Bible addresses the formation. Evolution says the Big Bang formed it all. But the biblical model tells us that in Genesis chapter 1, verses 14 and 19, that God created the heavenly planets, bodies, the planets, the stars, everything in them, the galaxies fully formed. Psalm 33:6 says, by the word of the Lord were the heavens made. So if the original heavenly bodies were created mature, then what we should expect to see, as we're going to find out later, are fully mature galaxies at all distances of the universe. Nothing is currently forming, because they've already been created, fully formed. Yet for some reason, in our science textbooks, we're told that the Big Bang is billions of years old, that distant starlight is billions of years old. But are we being given the proper evidence? I want you to understand that the evidence I'm going to present doesn't necessarily confirm creation. But evidence against one position is a support for another position. So I'm showing how the models that secular science has presented does not stand up to reason, does not stand up to scrutiny. And the only other option we are left with is creation, as the Bible states. So the first thing we need to look at is, are there evidences across the galaxies and even in our own solar system that show that we are not billions of years old, but instead a really young universe? So we look to the moon first. Based on Newton's third law of motion, a body that pulls against another body goes around in circles. So Earth's force pulls on the moon, and the moon pulls back on the Earth, just like Newton's law says. And this actually causes the moon to accelerate in its orbit so that it slowly spirals away from the Earth at 4 centimeters every year. Now we can watch this. We can observe it based on telescopes and observation towers across the globe. But let's do some math. Let's look backwards. If we look back at 1,000 years ago, the moon would have been 125 feet closer. Not a big deal. 1,000,000 years ago, it would have been 28 miles closer. 10 million years ago, it would have been 284 miles closer. Now we're getting somewhere. And 100 million years ago, it would have been 2,840 miles closer. 1,028,000 miles closer. Now that could cause some differences in the high tides here. But if we go back to 1.4 billion years ago, it would have been touching the Earth. Now remember, the moon and the Earth are both supposed to be about 4.5 billion years old. But we have just shown that at 1.4 billion, it would have been touching Earth at its present rate of escape. So An illustration showing this, so you get an idea, shows the moon slowly coming down from today all the way down to 1.4 billion years. It touches the Earth. So the moon actually shows and testifies that we are a young universe. But then evolutionists are all out there going, well, the origin of the moon, we just don't know. They've come up with several different theories. The first one was the fission theory, which was actually thought of by Charles Darwin's son, George. And he was an astronomer, and he came up with, said that the fission theory says the Earth spun so fast that a chunk of it broke off and became the moon. The problem with that, though, is that the moon is chemically different. The Earth could never spin so fast as enough to break off a piece and make it fly out. And even if it did, the escaping moon would have broken up as it was being catapulted into space. But the biggest difference is the Earth and the moon are completely different in their chemical makeup. Next theory they came up with was the capture theory, that the moon just kind of was captured by the Earth's gravity, that it was flying past and just stopped and started the moon's orbit. The problem with that, though, is, again, the moon would need to lose a lot of its speed. Otherwise, it would have just come and got slingshotted off into space. Because it would have to have slowed down and then start its rotation. So again, not a viable theory. And then finally, they came with the co-creation theory that says the Earth and the moon formed at the same time from the same debris that was orbiting the sun. That as the Earth formed, the moon formed from the same debris. But again, the problem that the Earth and the moon are different chemically is the biggest obstacle to overcome. If it was formed out of the same debris circling the sun, then it should be chemically compatible. They should be the same. Also, astronomers tell us that it's unlikely that the gravitational attraction between the two would be strong enough to hold the two together as they were forming. So we look to astronomers in secular science, and they tell us that the origin of the moon is still unresolved. They say that the best explanation is that the moon was created in its present orbit about 6,000 years ago. That's our best guess because nobody can tell us how it formed. The only place that tells us how the moon was created is the Bible. Day 4, God created the heavenly bodies that we see out there in space, including the moon. So what about comets? Do comets tell us of an old universe or a young universe? We have two types. We have long period comets and we have short period comets. So this is where we have to start thinking and putting our minds out there, that if the solar system is billions of years old, then long period comets, those comets that we see every 75 years, like Halley's Comet, we're told to look out every 75 years or so to watch it come around, those long period comets should not exist. The reason is as they pass Earth and they get by the atmosphere to streak through, they're breaking up. As they get by the sun to form this long tail, it's the ice and the rock breaking apart and deteriorating to form that long tail that's miles long behind it. That's the debris trail left behind it. And as they keep breaking up, if it's billions of years old, they shouldn't exist anymore. So what scientists did to combat this theory was they created what's called the Oort cloud. They say it sits out there past Pluto, and that it has millions of comets, that it just keeps replenishing the comet supply into our solar system. The problem with the Oort cloud is that it has never once been observed. There's absolutely no evidence that it even exists. And then on the other side, there's not enough mass out there for this hypothetical Oort cloud. There's no way it could hold enough comets that we see if the universe is millions and billions of years old. So Don D. Young, PhD in physics, said in the Astronomy in the Bible, he wrote, "The existence of the Kuiper belt and the Oort cloud of comets has not been verified." He said perhaps there's an alternative. The presence of comets may be evidence that the solar system is not as old as is often assumed. Now I mentioned in there, he also mentioned the Kuiper belt. The Kuiper belt is supposed to exist just beyond Neptune. And it's also supposed to supply these comets, that and the Oort cloud. Oort cloud never been observed. The Kuiper belt, we've actually seen objects in there that are too big to be comets. So there are other bodies out there, other large chunks of rock and so forth. So again, not a viable explanation. Timothy Ferris actually said that the Oort cloud has yet to be observed. The theory accounts so well for the distribution of comets, orbits, that most astronomers today accept its existence. So notice that. He said that it's never been observed, but theory's so good that we're going to just accept it based on no real evidence. That is not operational science. That is origins science with no evidence to back up its claim. That's right, that's the definition of faith. An unquestioning belief that does not require proof or observation. Here's one of my favorite quotes throughout this entire presentation. It says that many scientific papers are written each year about the Oort cloud. They talk about its properties, its origin, its evolution, yet there's not yet a shred of direct observational evidence for its existence. It says we write papers all the time about how it evolved, how it came to be, but there's no observational evidence. There's no true science to back it up. So who said this? Carl Sagan said it. Cosmos is all there was and all there ever will be. He just stated that we don't have a shred of evidence to support it. So again, how can this be true science? So comets have said we are a young universe. The moon, as it moves away, has shown we are a young universe. At least not the billions or millions that are claimed by secular science. The next piece of evidence we need to look at is the age of the sun. As the sun is doing its combustion, it's called thermonuclear fusion. It's getting brighter. That's what puts off the heat. But what we do know is that the core of the sun should alter, and it should grow brighter with age. What that means is as the sun gets older, we know this from observing other stars out there, as the star, our sun, gets older, it should be getting brighter. Science also tells us that if the sun is 4.6 billion years old, it should have brightened by at least 40%. So we should be looking at a sun today that is 40% brighter than it was 4.6 billion years ago. We're also told that the sun can only last for 10 billion years, so half of its life is already over. It's got another 5 billion years in it, and it's gone. So, if we look at Earth's average temperature today, our average temperature today is about 59 degrees Fahrenheit. Scientists tell us that a 25% increase in brightness increases our average temperature by about 32 degrees. A 25%. Really should be 40, but we're going to give evolutionists the benefit of the doubt here. 25% increase in brightness would have increased our temperature by 32 degrees. So if we subtract 59 from 32, we get an average temperature of 27 degrees. That's below freezing. But evolutionists tell us that the Earth had to be hot for evolution to have started, to have evolved 4.6 billion years ago. Yet taking just half, 25%, would have made the Earth a frozen popsicle, unable to support evolution. So, we've done the moon, we've done comets, age of the sun. Now let's look at how galaxies are formed. These are some nice pictures of a spiral galaxy, basically what our Milky Way looks like. They're supposed to spin a little bit slower on the outside of the rings as they do on the inside. I just like the picture, to be honest with you. No reason that picture's up there besides that. But what scientists also tell us is as we look at these through these large telescopes back to the far reaches of space, as far as we can get, we're actually looking back in time. This is what science tells us. We're going back to the beginning of the universe. We're going back to about 2 to 3 billion years after the Big Bang first happened. Been 15 billion years since then, according to secular science. So, as we're looking back, we expect to find these called proto or beginning galaxies, these star clusters just starting to form. What scientists say is that as we look back, we shouldn't see anything developed. We should see stars everywhere, clouds of dust and dirt as they're slowly being pulled together and forming these large galaxies or these star systems. Problem though, we have Johns Hopkins University as well as University of Texas have done some research and looked back, and what they found just 2 billion years after the Big Bang is they found a complex string of galaxies. Remember, there's not supposed to be anything complex out there at this point. It just happened, the Big Bang, by their standards. So it's just now starting to form. We found 300 fully mature galaxies in what's known as the redshift desert, meaning an area of space where there should be nothing. We found 300 fully mature galaxies. And Dr. Carl Glay's book from Johns Hopkins University says, we expected to find basically 0 massive galaxies beyond about 9 billion years ago. So before 9 billion years, there shouldn't be anything. So because the Big Bang models predict massive galaxies form last. Instead, we found highly developed galaxies that just shouldn't have been there. But they are. So these galaxies appear fully formed, mature structures. They're aligned in long strings. Some of these galaxies are even 300 million light years across. Now, this is where your brain really has to work, okay? A light year is how fast the speed of light goes. Light travels in 1 year. Now, some numbers. It can go 186,000 miles a second. It can go 5.9 trillion miles in a year. So 1 light year is 5.9 trillion miles. And some of these galaxies are 300 million light years across. So to find your number, how long it would take to get across that, traveling at the speed of light, these proto-galaxies that shouldn't exist, you would have to take 300 million times 5.9 trillion. And we have found hundreds of these galaxies out there. Dr. Francis expressed the problem. He says, the simulations tell us that you cannot take matter in an early universe and line it up in strings this large. There simply hasn't been enough time since the Big Bang to form structures this colossal. The problem with naturalistic cosmology is that there's no God. If we don't allow God to do it, we shouldn't expect it. Shouldn't be there, but they are. Now, to a creationist, this does not pose a problem. When I look into the Bible, or we look into the Bible, it says on day 4, God created the heavenly bodies, the planets, the stars, the moon, everything. So when we look out into space, we should expect to see fully formed galaxies at the farthest reaches of space. Secular science just confirmed that prediction. Score another one for the Bible. Joseph Silk, professor of astronomy at the University of Oxford, said, many aspects of the evolution of galaxies cannot yet be determined with any certainty. Just doesn't know. Some other quotes. Joseph Trefli, PhD in physics, wrote a book called The Dark Side of the Universe, and he says there shouldn't be galaxies out there at all. And even if there are galaxies, the problem of explaining the existence of galaxies has proved to be one of the thorniest in cosmology, meaning we don't know. The Facts on File Dictionary of Astronomy states that galaxies must have condensed out of gases expanding from the Big Bang. Details of the formation of galaxies are still highly uncertain, as is their subsequent evolution. I want you to notice the word must have, because to an evolutionist there's no other choice. It must have been this way, because there's no other viable explanation to a naturalistic world. But I ask you, is that any more scientific than in the beginning God created? No. Still accepted by faith. So we've looked at the two models. We've looked at the origin of ages. Now we need to look at the origin of stars. Evolution tells us that stars evolved billions of years before the Earth ever did. But the Bible, theistic evolution and progressive creation also state that stars evolved billions of years before the Earth. Remember, this is the part that's creeping into the church today. This is what we talked about last time with the church's compromise. Theistic evolution, progressive creation. Matter of fact, there was a story just recently over in Kenya. They're getting ready to put on a supposed human ancestor. Turconaboy in the National Museum, and some of the bishops of the evangelical church are stepping forward saying, no, I didn't evolve from that. That goes against the Bible. It's a blasphemy. Article looked pretty good up to that point. After that, though, he states that he believes the world is 12,000 years old. I'll even give him that. He says then 6,000 years later, man came onto the planet. Because he says he believes that one day to us, or one day in the Bible is like 1,000 years. So, created in 6 days, 6,000 years. My question, though, is where did he get the other 6,000 years? Obviously, it deals with the whole Lucifer flood, the whole gap theory, something before Adam, meaning death and disease, again, creeping in. It's not viable to Christianity. The Bible states that the earth created on day 1, that the sun, the moon, and the stars were all created on day 4. Hugh Ross, an astronomer, as well as a progressive creationist, says that the entire process of stellar evolution is by natural process alone. He claims to be a Christian. We do not have to invoke divine intervention at any stage of the history of the life cycle of the stars that we observe. Is that statement consistent with what the Bible teaches us? Absolutely not. He is supposed to be a Christian, one that supports the Bible. Some statements that show that God is the one that created the Bible. Remember, he said we don't have to invoke divine intervention. The Bible says otherwise. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 16, and God made 2 great lights. The greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. Isaiah chapter 40, lift up your eyes on high, and behold, who hath created these things? Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. Psalm 33, by the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the host of them. Psalm 148:5, for he commanded, and they were created. Isaiah 45, I, even my hands, have stretched out the heavens, and all their hosts have I commanded. So is stellar formation by natural processes compatible with Scripture? No. It is by the word of the Lord. It is by the word of Jesus that the universe and the stars were created. So what does physics tell us? Physics says that, at least the popular theory, I should say, is that stars form from a vast clouds of gas and dust, and that they start getting sucked and pulled together, and they eventually condense and form stars. What physics actually tells us, though, is that gas and dust clouds cannot contract, they only expand. When was the last time you saw a fire and you saw the smoke coming together? Never. It doesn't happen. The smoke disperses and spreads out. So why is it any different in a place where there is no gravity? At least I would expect to see it here on Earth. Gravity might pull it back together. But in space there's no gravity, hence the reason astronauts float. It cannot happen. Don D. Young, again, PhD in physics, says, the complete birth of a star has never been observed. The principles of physics demand some special conditions for star formation, and also for a long time period. It says in space, however, every gas cloud is light years in size, hundreds of times greater than the critical size needed for a stable star. So again, the conditions aren't right for star formation based on how the Big Bang says stars are supposed to be formed. Charles Leda and Frank Hsu, both astronomers, state, despite numerous efforts, we have yet to directly observe the process of stellar formation. The origin of stars represents one of the fundamental, unsolved problems of contemporary astrophysics. They said, we don't know. So why are we told so many times that we do know? Math cannot lie. Math is based on numbers. It is objectionable. It's unbiased. So let's look at the numbers. We know for a fact that there are 100 billion galaxies out there. That's at least the number that we can count. We know there's probably more. That means there's 200 billion stars per galaxy. So think 2 times 200 billion times 100 billion. And if the universe is 20 billion years old, math tells us we should see 1 trillion stars forming every year. Now, that's too big of a number for my brain to grasp. Many of you might be a tad bit smarter. But that would mean 2.7 billion stars form every day. 31,700 stars form every single second. So we have to ask ourselves, are the textbooks correct? Because we should be seeing 31,000 stars forming every second. And we're not seeing, remember what they said, we have yet to see 1 star form. Textbook by Prentice Hall, Earth Science, states that a nebula is a large amount of gas, and that all stars begin their lives in these nebulas, and that gravity can pull some of the gas and the dust of the nebula together, and the stars form when the contracting dust and the gas get so hot that nuclear fusion starts. But is this a statement of science or belief in evolution? It's not based on anything observable. It's not based on any science whatsoever. So in conclusion on star formation, Abraham Loeb states that the truth is that we don't or do not understand star formation at a fundamental level. So we have to ask ourselves, why are so many textbooks stating that we do know how stars form when we just do not? So what about the scientific evidence and the Big Bang? Remember, just a quick definition, science tells us out of the handy space answer book that the Big Bang happened 15 to 20 billion years ago, and a big bang or explosion occurred, creating the universe. And the universe began as an infinitely dense, hot ball scrambling space and time. Now, this is not the explosion that we're thinking of. Okay? I know I used the analogy of a firecracker earlier just to put the idea of randomness and scatter out there. What they say is, here's this ball of matter, and it just kind of spread out. It kind of stretched itself out so that there is no center and there is no end. There's no boundary but no center at the same time. We have an expansion of space and time. So based on this slide, where it slides out, does this sudden explosion of nothing into something, meaning the universe, sound like a miracle? Absolutely. Paul Davies, an evolutionist and a physicist, in his book, The Edge of Infinity, wrote that the Big Bang represents an instantaneous suspension of physical laws, the sudden, abrupt flash of lawlessness that allowed something to come out of nothing. He says it represents a true miracle. So why is that more scientific, again, than in the beginning God created? It's not. But I love it when Paul Davies, because he gets in debates all the time with creationists, and he states that right there is a miracle. The Big Bang tells us that there's no special place in the universe, that there's no center to the universe. It also wants you to believe that the universe is homogeneous, meaning that it's the same throughout. That for all the reaches of space, we should see the same thing. So what we look to is we look to what's called the red light spectrum. How many of you are familiar with the red light spectrum? A couple of you? Basically, it's our way of measuring distances. Okay? On the close end, we have blue, and on the far end, we have red. Basically, think of a train approaching you. As it approaches you, those sound waves compress, and the sound gets louder, screeches, screeches, and then it passes by. And as it passes by, those sound waves stretch out. That would be the red end of the spectrum. So the blue end as it comes closer, red as it goes further away. Same thing. What this does is it actually describes for us the expansion of the universe. Tells us the distance of a galaxy from our Earth. So we can actually accurately measure how far these are based on the redshift light pattern that we see. So our interpretation is we look up at Galaxy 1 and we can see exactly where it is on the redshift. We look at Galaxy 2 and we can tell where it is. Galaxy 3, the same thing. Based on the Big Bang, though, we should observe redshifts at all distances along this light spectrum, being homogeneous. It should look the same thing according to the Big Bang model. So, based on this slide, this is what we should be seeing. It should be all over. No gaps. But what we actually observe, though, is that we have a distinct quanta, or called quantize, meaning that we have 1 million light-year intervals between galaxies. So we have a galaxy, then a million light years later we have a galaxy, nothing in between. Then another million years we have another galaxy, nothing in between. That's called quantized. We're seeing definite order out of these galaxies. We're not seeing what the Big Bang has predicted based on redshift. So what that means is if we look at our galaxy, we'll say our starting point, and we look out, in a million light years we see a ring of galaxies around us. Then another million light years we see another ring of galaxies around us. And another million light years beyond that, another ring of galaxies around that. Meaning that we are the definite center, or very close, at least our galaxy is the center of the universe. The Big Bang says that can't happen. So has this been confirmed? Or are we as creationists just simply making this up? William G. Tift and W. J. Cook in the Astrophysical Journal stated that there is now firm, very firm evidence that redshifts of galaxies are quantized, meaning that they are indefinite intervals. We then go to find out that Russell Humphreys, a PhD in physics in a technical journal, wrote that astronomers have confirmed that numerical values of galaxy redshifts are quantized, tending to fall into distinct groups. So that would mean the galaxies tend to be grouped into spherical shells concentric around our home galaxy, placing us in the center, meaning that we are special to the Creator, that there is a definite center to what we see out there. Confirmation came from Hubble recently, about as early as 1997. It says that the redshift distribution has been found to be strongly quantized in a galacentric frame of reference. So what does this mean to the Big Bang? This means that it's in big, big trouble. Because we're disproving all the theories, the unproved assumptions that the Big Bang Theory states. Russell Humphreys, again, in his book Starlight and Time, says that the quantized distribution of galactic redshifts observed by various astronomers seems to contradict all cosmologies founded on the Big Bang. So the fact that we have these redshifts at intervals contradicts everything about the Big Bang. It's supposed to not be a center. We're the center. It's supposed to be homogeneous, meaning everywhere. And it's not. So how are they going to prove otherwise? Halton Art, staff astronomer at Mount Wilson, states the fact that measured values of redshift do not vary, but come in steps, certain preferred values, is so unexpected that conventional astronomy has never been able to accept it. He goes on, in spite of the overwhelming observational science. So what he says is based on real science. We can't fathom it. We don't want to allow it into the realm of astronomy based on real science. We're going to stick to something that cannot be proven. Something that has no direct evidence is what he just confirmed. See, and this is where we get into a big debate with the creation evolution. Evolutionists want this to be a battle of science versus religion. And folks, I'm here to tell you that it's not. It is a fight of science versus better science. Observational science can be proved. It can be observed, which is what he just said can't happen in astronomy, as opposed to origin science. So what this deals with now is the problem of distant starlight. The question always comes up, how do we see distant starlight if the universe is young? Because they're billions of miles away, and it takes that light 5.9 trillion miles every year, and it's still billions of light years away. Dr. Russell Humphreys came up with a theory, and again I'm going to put up this picture of a flower here to kind of show you the expandingness that I'm talking about. Now what his theory is, it is controversial, and again it is a theory, it's unprovable assumptions, but it shows that we are at least keeping it within a biblical worldview framework. It's called the white hole theory, and it's all based on Einstein's theory of relativity, which is what based his black holes on. And we know black holes exist. And he said that because of black holes, we also have white holes doing just the opposite. Instead of sucking everything in, it's spitting everything out. He also said that, during his theory of relativity, that time is not constant, that time varies. It moves at different rates. For instance, time moves 5 microseconds per year slower at the Royal Greenwich Observatory, located at sea level, than it does at the National Bureau of Standards in Boulder, Colorado, which is a mile above sea level. Now, I know you're saying 5 microseconds, Steve. I know it's not a lot, but it shows that it does vary. He also said that if we took atomic clocks that are never off and flew them in different directions across the globe, that they would vary by a set time. We did this in 1977, and he was right. So, time moves differently. We observe it during Big Bend. Big Bend's higher up, less gravity than we are down at the bottom, and it moves faster on the Big Ben clock than it does on the watches down in London. So, with that theory, the white hole theory shows that it's like a flower blooming, like on the screen, and it's blooming out. And as this hole of matter that God created on day 1, everything is in this hole, earth, everything. The waters, the expanse, the heavens. And as it is starting to bloom and blow everything out, this is the boundary. As those stars pass that boundary, time speeds up rapidly as it flings forward. They're going out everywhere. But we can't see it. We're still in this hole. And as we spit out on day 4, the white hole collapses and is gone. What that means is on day 4, it's only 24 hours in this hole. But billions of years are passing on the outside as the stars are thrown out to all directions. On day 4, Earth comes out. At that point, everything is visible. On day 4, He created for us to see the stars and the heavens. Again, this is a theory, I know, and it's hard to wrap our minds around it. But again, it sticks with a biblical framework of view. It gives the starlight time enough to come to a universe that is merely 6,000 years old. And on day 4, as we come out of this white hole, as it collapses, we see the light hitting us from these stars that have been out there for billions of years on their time. He also said, Dr. Russell Humphreys, that 3 effects should be apparent if this is true. First, the expansion of space would have left a very uniform background throughout the universe every million years. Very uniform. Second, as space itself expanded, the light coming from the stars would be shifted toward the red end of the spectrum. Again, we have confirmed that with observational science. Third, if the Earth was close to the center of the universe, it would have been one of the last things to emerge from the white hole. Billions of years would have elapsed for distant stars, giving plenty of time for light from those stars to have reached Earth. We see all 3 of those effects taking place. So is there an alternate theory that sticks to an almighty creator God instead of the Big Bang? Absolutely. And again, I don't know if it's right or if it's wrong, but it gives me hope that there are people so much smarter than I am defending God's creation with science. So what about the Bible and the Big Bang cosmology as we wrap up? Implications of the Big Bang tell us that God's creation was not 6 days. That the meaning of very good is not very good, as stated in Genesis chapter 1:31. It says that death was before sin. The Big Bang tells us that the Genesis flood was not worldwide. Also, the Big Bang is right. Colossians 1:16. All does not mean all. So, also, what do the heavens declare? God or evolution? All of these scriptures need to be interpreted in light of current trends of scientific thinking? No. Again, we have to not let science interpret the Bible, but let the Bible interpret science. There are 17 different times where the Bible states that God stretched the heavens. The Bible says that there is an edge to space. There is an end to the vastness. Excuse me. 2 different Voyager satellites were sent in opposite directions back in the 70s. And just recently I read a report a few months back that states that they got to this edge of something and they stopped transmitting. According to all instruments at NASA, these Voyager spacecraft are still operational. They're still functioning just fine. They're still sending back data. But they're sending back nothing. So, could they have hit this edge of space that God tells us is there? Absolutely. The Bible says that we have a God of miracles, a God that created trees mature with fruit, a God that created mature animals. God created Adam mature. Jesus fed the 5,000. Jesus turned water into wine. He withered the fig tree. There was an instant learning of languages after the Tower of Babel. There was an instant healing of a soldier's ear in Luke. Creation was very good. A God of miracles. A God that is all-powerful. This is just a short list of dozen different scientists, all with PhD, ranging from astronomy to astrophysics to mathematical physics, condensed matter physics, aeronautics, combustion theory, nuclear engineering. I hope to one day be as dumb as these guys are, because evolutionists say that we are ignorant to believe in creation. Again, I hope one day I'm half as dumb as they are. Pattern of evolution. Have we seen a pattern in evolution? In a model of interpretation of cosmology? We've seen that they don't report all the evidence. We've seen that we are constantly updating this Big Bang model to match the observed data. We've seen that there's a disagreement among astronomers. We've even witnessed that there's a disregard for biblical interpretation, and that there is an appeal to churches to accept real science. You can have evolution and the Bible. Remember, this is not a battle of religion versus science. This is a battle of science versus better science. Science that can be repeatable and observed. That is real science. So which is easier for you to believe? That nothing created something, or that in the beginning God created? The next slides are just simply pictures. Pictures to show the massiveness of space. This is our galaxy. And where you see the arrow pointing to is Earth. That's one galaxy out of 100 billion. And to give you a better perspective, because we think our solar system is very large, all 9 planets up to Pluto. Here's another picture of our galaxy. And now we're pointing to where the sun is. Our sun. That's not even our whole solar system. Just the sun is a speck in this galaxy. There's 100 billion other galaxies. Nice picture of our galaxy from Hubble. We have these wonderful pictures of Jupiter. Giant gas planet, as well as Saturn here. And God put these giant planets out there to protect us from asteroids and comets from being our planet. These giant planets are there to protect us, shield us. We see evidence for young age just within Saturn's rings. The rings are made up of rocks and ice, but they're still jagged and full of edges. And had they been going around for billions of years, they would have been smoothed with time as they hit other rocks. The erosion process. Here we have a picture of Earth. Earth is unique. We sit on an axis different than every other planet that we have out there. On a 23 and a third, or fourth. So that we have seasons at just the right time. We are the only planet that has a complete spherical orbit around the sun. All the other planets are elliptical, meaning some days they're hot, some days they're cold. If we were elliptical, some days we'd be an ice ball, other days we'd be molten lava. But we go in a complete circle around the sun, meaning that we have perfect seasons. If we went 20 degrees one way or another in our orbit, we would be in an uninhabitable zone. We're the only planet with water. We're the only planet that has clouds and the elements necessary for life. And tell me that we are not in a special place in the center of the universe, showing that all the rest of the heavens are there to declare the glory of God for us. Are there UFOs, aliens? No. Everything out there is for our benefit, to testify to God's creation. That is the only reason it's out there, is for us to know that He does exist, and that there are answers as well. With that, I want to thank you for coming. I want to appreciate you and for giving me the time here. And I know your brains probably hurt. If you have any questions, I'll be sticking around for a little bit, so please come up to me, ask anything. Again, thank you.